Hey, good morning, all. So glad to have you with us today on the Common Good Podcast. Wednesdays, when we get to be encouraged with a little common good faith. And so glad to have you aboard. It's June 16th, which, is always a great day. It's probably somebody's birthday. And if it's your birthday, happy birthday to you on June 16th. That's why it matters to you. But around our little world here, it's exciting because this is the day in which a summit is happening that we think is quite important. And you're going to be encouraged to know that your Wednesday podcast co-host, Stephany Spaulding, is among many other things that she does, which she has talked about. She is the executive director of the Truth and Conciliation Project. And they're launching, the Truth and Conciliation Project has a summit that starts tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to talk about that today, talk about the importance of it, what's going on. But as I like to say, this is our Harvey Milk moment. We are here to recruit you. We're here to recruit you to join tonight at 6 o'clock and tomorrow night and on Friday. So super glad to have you aboard. Normally we have Laura Truax with us, but today we have Dena Samuels with us because she's part of the Truth and Conciliation Project. So we're going to be talking about that. And of course, here with Dominique as well. Good morning, Dominique. How is life just outside of Atlanta, my friend?
Dominique. Rolling up. Are we?
Gotcha. We got you. No, we don't. We had you, and we didn't have you. Then we have you.
Okay, I think I switched something.
All right, we got you.
Sorry.
Good morning, Dominique. Yeah. How are things just outside of Atlanta?
Stuff is good. It's starting to heat up here. Starting to really get into the thick of what really is the summer, and so embracing all that comes with that. And so, yeah, I'm excited for today's conversation, though. And so I'll kick it over to Stephany to kind of introduce Dr. Samuels and today's conversation.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful to be back with you. For those who are faithful listeners and for those who are joining us for the first time, it is Wednesday. So it is a faithful Wednesday here on the Common Good Podcast. And I'm excited to talk about the Truth and Conciliation Commission as well as our summit today that we are starting off. It's our inaugural summit. It's been a year in the making since the commission has existed. And so we are really pushing this grassroots effort for a federal commission around truth and conciliation. If you have paid attention in the last 24 hours, we had something unprecedented happen last night with a unanimous vote from the Senate to honor and to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. Now, there's a whole lot of conversation that we need to have around that. But when we think about just the legacy of race and racism in this country, there's so much truth that we need to unearth if we are going to get to a place of conciliatory practice. And these are the foundational pillars of what the Truth and Conciliation Commission and Summit will discuss. We have joining us, as you can see, a stellar lineup. And again, we will come back to just a fuller conversation. But right now, I want to introduce Dr. Dena Samuels, one of our board members, as well as one of my closest friends and just an amazing human being on this planet. If you have had the opportunity to learn from her, then you are truly blessed. And so again, thank you. I just want to welcome Dena to the conversation and allow her to just introduce herself and how she's connected to this work.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor, not only to be here this morning, but just to be working alongside you, Stephany, really for anything that you do. That's really what brings me here for Truth and Conciliation. But I was teaching courses at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, alongside Stephany for many years, but I was there for 20 years teaching courses on social justice studies. And since about 3 years ago, went off and now I'm consulting full time. But so that's what I do for the work, for my life's passion, my career and all of that. But my passion takes the form of social justice in many other ways, including community activism. And one of those ways is this national conversation around truth and conciliation. And I love the mission, the vision, and I'm just honored to be a part of it.
Well, Dena, it's super good to have you here as well. So, Stephany, there's a couple of terms that I think are really important for people to grasp and get their heads around because they're powerful. One of those is Juneteenth. So we should talk about that and why on the 19th of June, that day has been set aside. Now, as you mentioned, is recognized as a national holiday, but it's also been an important day of, Freedom Day or Jubilee Day, Liberation Day, Emancipation Day, really known much more inside the Black communities, frankly, than the white communities. And that's changed in recent years. So I think I think there's a piece of the story we should talk about because this Saturday is Juneteenth. And for a lot of people, there's activities happening in their cities and towns. And a lot of people that I know are doing some fast catch up to understand what that is. But then there's also this idea of this, the commission that you're helping to lead, the Truth and Conciliation. And that's really particular language. A lot of people might think they're mishearing us or we're misspeaking. They might know of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was a part of the South Africa narrative for the removal of apartheid as the official segregation and discrimination system, and that there was Desmond Tutu and Mandela and others pulled together a nationwide reconciliation and truth-telling effort. But in the United States, you're calling that something slightly different, conciliation. So I think both of those would be interesting to talk about. Can you say a little bit about Juneteenth and how that's understood and why this summit, is such an appropriate time to be happening here on June 16, 17, and 18, the days just before Juneteenth on the 19th of June?
Absolutely. So when we look at U.S. history, we cannot deny, even though some people actually try, that slavery happened. And we look at the Civil War and the role that the Civil War had in battling the preservation of slavery or the quote unquote end to chattel slavery in the United States. And the mythos is that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. He did, in fact, sign the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862 that went into effect in January 1st, 1863, that essentially allowed those who were enslaved in southern states to have liberation if they would be a part of the Union and also participate in the work of preserving the Union. So there's that piece. The Emancipation Proclamation is signed by Abraham Lincoln. It goes into effect January 1863, but it is not until almost 2 years later that in Texas, you have communities of those who are enslaved who find out about the Emancipation Proclamation and their liberation. And so it's marked as June 19th of 1865 that these enslaved communities find out about their liberation. So you have slave owners who are continuing in the practice of owning human beings, even though the law says differently in this country. And so that Emancipation Day, that Liberation and Freedom Day is the honoring of Juneteenth for a number of African descendants of slavery in the United States who don't necessarily recognize July 4th as a liberation celebration for them, because the nation does not always align with the experience of African descendants of slavery in this country. So that is Juneteenth. That is why so many Black communities and now communities of color and white communities are honoring Juneteenth in this country. And it is surprising that unanimously the Senate voted to make it a federal holiday. And I can come back to my thoughts on that in a moment. So when we think about the Truth and Conciliation Commission, you're absolutely right, Doug. The language is extremely intentional because the work of reconciliation, which so many people are familiar with, the terminology in and of itself articulates this assumption that an agreement, a place of respect, a place of harmony, a place of mutual understanding has existed before. So to reconcile means to go back to that agreement, to go back to that place, to go back to that relationship, to repair that relationship. But when we think about the role of white racial violence in this place called the United States, when we think about the history and the truth of race and racism in this country, there is no place to return to. And it's fascinating. We'll have Mark Charles with us tomorrow night, and he does a lot of work around the doctrine of discovery and the church in Christianity, and how this idea of dehumanizing other human beings is so central to the development of the United States that there is no place to return to. So even when in 2016 or leading up to the 2016 election, you have on one hand Trump make America great again, or Hillary Clinton talking about how great America already was, it is not great for people of color, and that space to return to is very problematic, which is why we are specific about the work of conciliation, which means to build the practice of agreement, to build conciliatory work together. And that is our hope for this country, that as we dismantle race and racism in this country, that we could build the conciliatory practice to bring us to a place of an agreement as we advance forward as society.
But, I think that's really significant. I was just looking around recently at the details on Juneteenth, and states, even though, so the federal government made a federal case out of it by having a federal holiday be voted on yesterday, which is a really big deal. 47 states in the District of Columbia have recognized Juneteenth in their state. And here's what I found intriguing. Only 4 of those states recognized Juneteenth before 2001. Texas in 1980, Florida in 1991, Oklahoma in 1994, the great state of Minnesota in 1996, and then all the rest in 2001 and a whole bunch in the middle 2000s and even after 2010. That's a curious history, right? It was obviously a bigger deal in Texas, as you mentioned, in Galveston, Texas. But these kinds of movements have their home in some places before they spread. And movements are kind of like this, right? You think that, some of these states didn't engage in a state recognition of Juneteenth until 2011, something like that. And Texas had been at it since 1980. And for crying out loud, Oklahoma, not known as one of the places to be sort of, face forward on racial issues, in 1994 had acknowledged it and the state had been paying attention to and wanting people to know about Juneteenth. And I think that's a powerful part of seeing how movements happen and how they grow, because it can seem like there were a whole lot of years between 1865 and 1980 when no states recognized it, and then just a few, one in 1980, and then a couple of them in the early mid 1990s, and then soon all the rest in the 2000s, and now a federal recognition. So you begin to realize that some of these small efforts that seem like they're not going anywhere are actually the seeds for something that's going to become a larger national movement. And I think that's something we should think about as a project like Truth and Conciliation project gets going. Whomever shows up tonight, for the inaugural kickoff of this event at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And they can find it at truthandconciliation.org, all the details about this. They're sort of the Texas or Oklahoma, right, of this movement, right? So people have been talking about it. Truth and Conciliation is needed to happen. But these early people that get in, and sometimes maybe some of the surprising people, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma. Now, these are places that we tend to talk about as having the most deeply rooted issues and problems. And that there might be something to say about that, too, that some of these topics were dealt with first there, but are still needing to be worked on.
Yeah. And I am, again, it's interesting to see who comes in first and why they come in. I am excited that the Senate passed this federal legislation, and I believe that the House will pass it too, and that we will get the president to sign off on it. But I am also weary that they unanimously signed it so that next week they will not have the conversation that really needs to happen, and we will bypass the work that really needs to be done in passing the For the People Act. And so it is a way to not deal with it. It's to symbolically say, okay, let's appease these Black people, but not give them access to the ballot, and not and strip away what it really means to be emancipated or liberated in this country. And so, again, just really wanting to bring our colleague Dena Samuels into this conversation and thinking about, just the overall umbrella work that we tend to be doing when it comes to the work of the spirit versus the work of societal transformation, and how we continue to move forward. Like, what in your mind, what is your hope that people will get from participating in this summit or being early investors, so to speak, journeyers, sojourners with us in this work? What are you hoping for?
I love the question. If it's okay, can I comment on what Doug had brought up?
Anything, absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to say that, when you think about 150, however many years to get to the point of making this a federal holiday, and you think about comparing, when you talk, Doug, about social movements, and the fact that it took 72 years for women to get the right to vote. So get the right to earn the right to vote, which white men had from the get-go, right? That think about the difference in how long it took. Social movements take a long time. And so when I think about this, and I think about the white supremacist ideology that made it take 150 whatever years to get to this point today. So yeah, it's I think that the 72 years for women to gain the right to vote, it was, often spearheaded. Certainly there were BIPOC women very invested in the suffrage movement, but I think about it as, given that this is, a lot of folks will see the slavery, the whole era of slavery, as an embarrassment. It's like, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it. And I think that's the way white supremacist ideology actually seeps into a conversation to squelch any movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really just wanted to share that. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that before I answer Stephanie's question.
Yeah, well, I'll make just a brief comment about it. And I know, Dominique, you're looking to jump in here too. But look, this country's inability to honestly talk about our own history, rooted first in the slavery narrative, which was not just an accidental thing that the country did once, made a mistake, and we should just let bygones be bygones. It was a country structured economically, legally, and societally around the idea that property is the essential element of the capitalist experiment in the United States. and the ownership of property across the board. That's what's embedded in the Constitution. So everything about this country is rooted in property rights. And then the notion, which was unique to the United States, and this is what's important, unlike slavery or indebtedness or servanthood that was taking place other places in the world, Stephany referred to the phrase chattel slavery. There was a new invention of human interaction to claim that a human being was property. That is the unique American terrible contribution to the global slavery struggles from the 1300s through the middle 1800s in the United States. That the notion was not just that a person that there was an economic system built around some people working for other people or indebted servanthood or whatever happened in other parts of the world. In the United States, theologically, legally, morally, the notion was property. And so the idea that Stephany brought up at the beginning, that the Emancipation Proclamation was really an argument about what the federal government could do in relationship to property owned by, that was held by slave owners, and that property were human beings. Mm-hmm. That's the piece that the kind of slavery that existed in the United States was particularly horrible and particularly supported by religious narratives. There would have been no way to invent a narrative of owning another person as a piece of property if religious communities hadn't gone along with it. And the divide inside of religion in the North and South was all about this. And so it was a brutally horrible thing. So when it's down talked, when it's diminished by people who want to say, look, let's get over slavery. Let's just sort of move on. It happened everywhere in the world. Different people enslaved different people. We've all evolved since then. That's not the conversation that the United States, in my view, needs to have. We need to talk about why did we invent a particular cruelty and how is that continuing? Because that's the thing that the Truth and Conciliation Project wants to get after, is not just what was. We do have to reconcile ourselves with our past, but we have to reconcile ourselves with how that's currently happening. And this is the part that's just so mad. So sorry for the brief little explosive sermon on this, but Dena, your comments really sort of got me riled up about the fact that we just refuse, and people of prominence and influence in this country diminish it, or many people don't know how to talk about it, and they don't know the details of slavery and how it was embedded in our legal system and how it remains embedded in our legal system.
I mean, I think the primary illustration of this is the fact that we as a nation were able to celebrate Declaration of Independence and July 4th for nearly 90 years before Juneteenth. And most of us continue to celebrate the 4th of July with no kind of conviction around the fact that for nearly 90 years, we're proclaiming ourselves to be free while Black people were shackled in chains. And so I think the fact that there is no contrition around that, no acknowledgement of that, both outside the church and inside the church, for the most regard, outside of the Black community, that is an indication of like how deeply embedded these logics are, and the way in which we have just accepted the fact that when we talked about freedom from our founding fathers, we know that it doesn't mean for all people, because all people weren't recognized as invalidated as people. Some people were reduced and subjugated to property. And so hopefully, I think for me, one of my hopes is that as we really start to press into these conversations about Juneteenth and some of these contradictions around what we mean by freedom when we declare it, will really help us to have a more sober conversation, which will lead back into the work that this conference is really trying to help us do. But I even think about when Frederick Douglass gave his famous speech, what does the 4th of July have to do with the slave? And he was asked to give that speech on July 4th in 1852 at a Ladies Anti-Slavery Society event in Rochester. And he refused to give the speech on the 4th. He threw off the whole conference and said, I will not give the speech on the 4th of July because the 4th of July has nothing to do with my people. Because at this time, Black people still haven't been released. And so he gives the speech on July 5th. Most people don't know that. Because he boycotts July 4th and actually gives his speech on July 5th. And so when the speech gets shared on social media and everything in a few weeks for the 4th of July, I want to give people a new foundation and understanding of the significance of first his protest, but then the underlying reasons why it was so prophetic for him to speak the truth that he did in that moment in time. And so all of that really points to the work of this conference, and what we're really trying to build is a foundation to soberly have a conversation around what does it mean to celebrate independence in this country, to talk about freedom, to talk about being a land of the free. What does it mean, especially when we really are honest about the fact that even after this type of slavery is ended, we get, the manifestation of the 13th Amendment, which leads to, all this kind of slavery through the form of mass incarceration, and particularly when we talk about the system of convict leasing, and how really that system enslaves Black people legally until 1921, and then illegally for another 20 years until 1941. So there is some real conversations that we need to have. And if we're bold enough to have it, if we have enough integrity to have it, then we can start to really pursue the things that we proclaim ourselves to be as a nation. But until we do that, we're going to continue to have this circular conversation, and so many of our sisters and brothers kind of living in denial and defensiveness out of that denial, because there is this refusal to reconcile with the truth of who we've been and what we continue to perpetuate when we refuse to have these conversations soberly.
Yeah, if I could just say that, when I think about this conversation, and I agree with you, Dominique, like we're not having it. We're just not having it. There are segments of our population that want to get involved in the conversation, but don't know how, don't know where to start. They're afraid to speak up because, especially white folks, are afraid to get involved in the conversation because they're afraid they're going to say something wrong or offend somebody. And so they just don't get involved. And I feel like, not that I'm speaking for all white folks, but that just seeing, in the work that I do, which is cross-racial dialogue, I just see there's a lot of white folks who are silent around these issues. And this is what we need to shift. This is part of what we need to shift. But part of that too, and what we're going to be doing in these 3 days, is thinking about not only telling truth, but how do you receive the truth that's being told without bringing yourself into it? And, in terms of, my mind goes to white fragility, the idea that we are, oh, I can't hear this. It's too hard for me to hear. So therefore I'm going to stop listening, or I'm not going to respond, or I will respond. But, the tears and the heartfelt sadness, which we need to be crying. We need to be crying, getting involved in the discussion. At the same time, how do we receive in a way that's going to be productive and effective without focusing the conversation back toward, oh, this is hard for white folks to hear, right? That's pretty much the definition of white fragility. And we need to understand what that looks like. We need to be able to receive truth and also think about how do we build relationships across social differences, given the history that we have. And so I'm hoping, Stephany, when you asked what is my hope for this, it's really having a much deeper dive into these kinds of conversations than we typically see. And that we're going to be doing, from the conversations on Wednesday night and Thursday night, on Friday, we're going to actually be in breakout rooms, and folks are going to be doing self-reflective work which we don't often see either. Sometimes it's, we just have talking heads. This is much more of a discussion. It's much more of we would like when folks leave on Friday night, or at least I would like to see that they felt like not only was an amazing use of their time, they learned a lot, but also learned about themselves and what they need to do, what their next steps might be. This is for some folks, it'll be a beginning of a conversation as opposed to, okay, now we've done it. We're not checking any boxes here. This is our inaugural summit. We're hoping that this will, the conversation will continue certainly for the rest of my life. I expect to be having these conversations.
Yeah, it's very intentionally deep diving work, but also I know we talk about this being Faith Wednesday. It's very spiritual work as well, and that has been critical for us. And when we say spirit, we are not specifically referring to any religious tradition, but knowing that a lot of what has been done historically is to try to legislate from a head space, but not transform a heart space, right? And so the law can say whatever, those who have the courage for the law to say. But if we aren't really transforming the hearts and minds of individuals, then this work, to Dominique's point, is just very circular discussion, right? It's, we are surfacely talking about some things without moving and being different. To Doug's point, as we think about ourselves moving forward as a nation, we have to ask the question, what was so wrong within our spirits that we could come to the place of seeing and convincing and advancing human beings as property, as not like specially, as something different than human beings. Like and I say we, I wasn't a part of that, but but as the United States, as Western white society, allowing themselves to believe that it was rational to see human beings as savage and something other than human. And that has to be a work of the spirit, a transformation of the spirit, because it doesn't matter what the law says, right? The law can say that Ohio is an open carry state. The law does say Ohio is an open carry state. But when police officers see a Tamir Rice playing with a toy that other children play with, it is not because Tamir Rice is playing with a toy. It is because Tamir Rice is a Black boy who is not seen as human in the same way that little Johnny would be seen as a human being. So again, the law can say what it wants, but if our spirits and our hearts are not transformed, then we are continuing in like just a circular conversation.
Yeah, that is so well said, Stephany. And the narratives that exist around these issues in our society. I'm someone from a northern state, and it was possible for me to grow up and to be told the story. Look, there were 15 states by 1961, the dawn of the Civil War, that maintained slavery. And there were 19 states at that time. There's some territories that weren't yet established as states. There were 19 states that were considered free states. And the narrative can go, and I was told this, the free states freed the slaves, and we took then this biblical narrative, which a lot of people give, that were to set the captives free. And the United States then did the right thing and freed the slaves the way that, with the power of God and righteousness, the way that the nation of Israel was freed as slaves from Egypt, and the gospel's call to free all slaves everywhere. And so, look, the United States did the right thing, freed the slaves, and then we continue on with a narrative of, and then we freed the imprisoned and concentration camped people in Germany, and then we moved on to free the people in Korea, in South and North Korea, in the Koreas, and then we moved on to Vietnam, and we're a freedom-producing nation that was freeing people all over the world. And there's an awful lot of people for whom that's the narrative of the United States. So you hear political leaders and civic leaders and celebrity types saying things like, "Why do we keep down talking the United States? We're the freedom-bringing people," and the conflicted sort of almost schizophrenic narrative of who we the people are, that those southern states were as much America as we were. So we were the enslaving people, not just the freeing people. But this is the struggle that we have to know, like, what is the heart story that we're telling ourselves, and how do we come to recognition of this? One of the reasons I'm so into the Jesus Gospels is that in that narrative, the betrayer and the denier and the faithful, they're all the same people, right? That Peter and Judas and John and the other disciples are all mixed together in this life of the faithful and the harm bringer. And that's what we as a nation, that's what we as individuals have to come to determine. In the Christian world, that's called confession. I think what this conference that's starting tonight and running through the weekend calls it is conciliation, right? Like, it's the same thing. It's the collective recognition that we are the very peoples, whether or not somebody wants to place that on their own individual narrative. But I didn't fight in World War II, but somehow my dad did. So I feel this like, oh, I'm a part of the freedom people. But then when it comes to slavery, people say, like, I never enslaved anyone. But you don't grant the fact that the system did the same thing, and you have to bear that witness. So this is part of the reason for, when we talk on Wednesdays here about the faith side of this, that the truth telling is really important. Stephany, can you say a little bit about the truth part of the truth and conciliation piece and how important that is? And if people tap in tonight or watch it later on or tomorrow or Friday, or they watch the recordings of it, how that's going to help them, because I think a lot of people feel unmoored from the truth about all this.
Absolutely. And part of it is for the truth to be expansive, right? So many people, they love horses, right? But horses, they have such limited and myopic vision of the things that they can see. And when they are focused, they do amazing, majestic, and wonderful things. But get them distracted to see or looking off into another direction that takes away from their focus, and they become unruly, right? When we even tell that story about the Americans being the freedom-seeking people, or even the North and South, like, we have this conversation about the North being so progressively liberating and what have you, what is missing from the truth of that is immediately at the end of, and not even at the end of the Civil War, but immediately Abraham Lincoln began making negotiations with Southern states around how to repay them for the loss of their property, right? So you free the slaves and you see them still as property. And so now you see that there has been an insurance claim that the South can now make good on, that the North begins to concede around. And the issue of reparations being paid to white Southern former slave owners comes very much a part of our American narrative. The issue of removing and peeling back some of the promises made to these now free Black Americans who become citizens of the United States. So Dena points to women gaining the right to vote, white women gaining the right to vote, not Black women, because of their status and the race of their status. And so there's so much more to the truth about who we are, the motivations, the impacts, the intentions around how and why things happen that is not being talked about, that is not being told, so that our stories about ourselves are extremely myopic. Our stories about this country are extremely myopic to the point that nobody gets a cookie. I'm so sorry, and trying to hold my tongue and not use language because I know my mom is watching, but nobody gets a cookie for freeing the slaves. You made human beings slaves in the first place. That is a problem, right? You don't get to pat yourself on the back for redressing what was horrendously horrific to begin with. And so when we talk about the truth, it's really like digging deep down into the messiness, the dirt of this country, and working to alkaline the soil. Because nothing that we are able to do, nothing that we want and hope and dream to do in this country is possible if the very soil that we are rooted and grounded in is poisonous. It's always going to bear poisonous fruit. It is never going to be healthy. So we have to get into the ugly messiness of it if we are going to ever become what we hope to become as a nation.
So let me just say, scripture is explicitly clear. It says that the truth shall set you free. And as a nation, we continue to evade the truth. We want to deny the truth. We want to find ways to sidestep the truth because the truth is so harsh. And the harsh reality is, not only was chattel slavery, exploitative economically, it was intentionally set up in a way that made Black women rapeable so that they could reproduce more property. And so I think like the brutality of it, the fact that, some Christians were so thoroughly invested in the system of slavery that they distorted the word of God and created slave Bibles, where they took entire sections of the Bible out that had anything to do with liberation and freedom and God's kind of deliverance of the oppressed. Like, we really have to reckon with the depth of depravity and the way in which we literally said that slavery and the economic gains were more important to us than the gospel of Jesus Christ. Like, we really have to reckon with that as a nation. And one of the ways that I really talk about this is, I think it's a 4-step spiritual practice of remembrance. We have to remember the truth and remember rightly. We have to really do the hard work of remembering rightly. Then we have to confess the truth. We have to confess our role in it. Then we have to lament the impact of sin and the division it's caused and the exploitation and the way it has caused us to use God's name in vain and has led so many people to be turned off by the church and a relationship with God who otherwise might have been open to it. And then 4th, we're called to the work of repentance. And for me, anybody who's listened before, I'm really intent on talking about repentance, really through the lens of John the Baptist, where he talks about that there should be fruit in keeping with repentance. Like, our repentance is supposed to actually turn us away from sin back to God in a way in which produces fruit in the world and in our relationships and in the work of really counteracting systems and structures that thwart the shalom and the flourishing that God intended all of God's children to have. And so for me, I really think, this is the work that this conference is going to do in many regards. It might not use that same language, but since we're here to talk about it for our Faith Wednesdays, I want to frame this kind of for folks who are specifically from the Christian tradition, trying to figure out why this work is so essential and why this work is biblically rooted work.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about the faith-based nature of this work as well from my perspective. I'm a mindfulness practitioner. I'm Jewish. I've studied Eastern religions, Eastern philosophies, and all of that as well. So I don't come from the traditional Christian background. And that said, there's so much overlap. There's so much crossover in terms of all the things that Dominique mentioned, and that actually has been mentioned by everyone today. But just the ideas that, from a Jewish perspective, we're talking about repairing the world. It's called Tikkun Olam. For those who are familiar or not, Tikkun Olam is the idea that we must leave the world in a better place, in a better situation, because we were in it, than before we were. And so there is that practice that is deeply rooted in Jewish activism, but anybody who has that background, it comes from Jewish roots. For me, that's how I started thinking about this, and then from more of a Buddhist or Eastern philosophy and practice, just thinking about the fact that if we see ourselves as sacred, that's not only going to do well for us in terms of our own health and wellness and our own connection internally with our own spirit, but also if we think of our neighbors as the people that we're interacting with as sacred. You can't oppress somebody you think is sacred. You're not going to do that. You're going to want to lift them up. And I don't mean like as a savior. I'm talking about we lift each other. We all as human beings, we want to do the best for each other. We want to give the most. We want to be of service the most for each other. And then I actually bring it also towards the idea of looking at the planet as sacred, and that calls for environmental justice. So from a personal standpoint, you're talking about health and wellness, self-empowerment, all of that. From relating to others, you're now talking about social justice. And then when you're talking about treating the planet as sacred, you're talking about environmental justice. So it's weaving, and for me, that's a mindfulness practice. All three of those pieces are mindfulness practices. So that's the work that I do. I can't imagine doing any of this work any other way, but coming from that sort of spiritual health is really what I think about in terms of being of service in the world in all these different ways. It's doing social justice, in my mind, it's doing social justice from the inside out.
I think that's just such a powerful part, because there's just different kinds of people, right, who want to end up in the same place, but they're motivated by different causes. And Dena, I think that's so wise to recognize that whatever your impetus is, whatever sort of gets you into it, whether you're trying to reconcile your own spirituality, trying to get to your own place of growth, or you want to see the world healed, or you want to partner on behalf of someone who is suffering in human relationships, all of those are linked. The order in which you might first access one of those might be a little different, but ultimately, if you stay in the work, you're going to find yourself in all of those spaces and trying to find those pathways. Stephany, can we say a little bit about the conference that'll start tonight? You mentioned that it's fantastic lineup. And, Congresswoman Cori Bush is going to be there. She is such an interesting and wonderful person. If people haven't met Congresswoman Cori Bush yet, she's really she's a pastor and she's an activist out of Missouri, and she's going to be there. And Jay Quest and Norma Johnson. Can you talk a little bit about those people in reference to what Dena is talking about the integrated narrative of all of this? Because a lot of people are awakening to these issues, and they're still trying to bring together their own spirituality with their activism and trying to, feel those as symbiotic right foot, left foot activities.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned tonight, we kick off with Representative Cori Bush from Missouri's 1st District. And interestingly enough, and you'll find out if you are able to participate in the summit, that she was integral in the establishment of the Truth and Conciliation Commission. We were in conversation on the phone with each other the day after the murder of George Floyd, lamenting together. And that is where the birth of this work began. She is genuinely an activist at heart. We were both in the midst of our own activism as well as running for office at the same time, and being pastors. So Black women pastors running for office from a space of grassroots public service, coming together and just really lamenting this cycle of violence that is experienced intergenerationally in the Black community and other communities in the United States. So she's critical to why the Truth and Conciliation Commission even exists today. And then we have artistic healers, both in Jay Quest and Norma Johnson. We know that there is no way to create anything without creatives, right? If you don't have creative energy that is infused into the work that you are doing, then there is something lacking, and the healing work that is necessary to get to the place of even healing cannot take place. So we have both artists, spiritual healers in Jay Quest and Norma Johnson, who are helping to kick us off and to really ground the energy of this summit. Tomorrow, we will have a conversation with other Truth and Conciliation board members, as well as Mark Charles, who ran as an independent for the President of the United States last cycle. That should tell you something if you are not familiar with who he is, about our political structure and our system, that media system around politics that doesn't give access to everyone who is running for offices in this country. But Mark Charles is an indigenous theological leader as well. And we're excited to have him, and he will be with us in conversation with Reverend Dr. Jamie Washington, who is also doing this work of anti-racism within the church and connecting really centrally the role and the impact of Christian faith and Christian institutions to the development of race and racism in this place that we call the United States. And then Professor Miguel De La Torre, who is part of the work that Nurturing Justice is doing, another partner in the Truth and Conciliation Summit, will have a special presentation from his latest book and his latest work as well. And then on Friday, as Dena mentioned, is really the hands-on, deep dive, self-reflective workshops that we will be conducting throughout the day. Those workshops begin at 10 a.m. and go to 4:30. All of this is Central Time tomorrow. And here we have Reverend Claire Toomey and Reverend Dr. Chris Watson leading us in historical work of this country, like opening up our minds to hearing the truth about what has happened in this place that we call the United States. And then we have Dr. Carolyn Ross, who will lead us in how to tell our stories, but also how to receive the truth of other people's stories, as Dena pointed out, without centering ourselves. Do we bring ourselves to the listening? Absolutely. But our egos should not be so much that we center ourselves in someone else's truth so that we can't hear what they are saying. And then lastly, Dr. Samuels and I, my co-facilitator for life, like I love partnering and working with her. We will lead a workshop in how to be more than an ally. We hear the language of ally a lot. And in a lot of ways, that's just the base level of how we get into this anti-racism work. And so really digging deep into doing more than just trying to claim a title or an identity as an ally in this work. But I will say, this summit, for those who are listening and watching and want to participate, you can still participate. Just go to truthandconciliation.org and click on the Juneteenth tab to get access to how to register and participate. This summit is not an end all. It is not for people to show up and say, oh, I came, I did this summit, I got all of the answers. This really is a jumping off point for those of us who really are committed to doing the work that is necessary to undo racism in this country from a grassroots place that will impact us federally and nationally. So if you come and you're like, oh, I did this and everything is good, life's good now, then we have failed in our work. This really is a jumping off point for the work that is necessary. And we do encourage and hope that you come. If you cannot attend and be the Oklahomas and Texas of this work, it's okay, but you can begin to partner with the Truth and Conciliation Commission. Again, our website is truthandconciliation.org in different ways, and we will bring you along in future work as well. So one of the first steps is just going to the website and taking the pledge, telling yourself and the world that you are ready to do this work.
And so people can sign up there to put their name along with thousands of others on this pledge that healing is possible and it takes work, and that gets you engaged. So, I mean, if you can't make the entire session for tonight or tomorrow or all day on Friday, you can become part of this whole movement by going to truthandconciliation.org and clicking on the pledge. And each of the sessions are, I think is just a great design too. They're priced individually. So you can attend tomorrow or just tonight or only on Friday if it fits you. And they're like $45, total for the day, for each day. So you can put your own package together. And I just think, look, if you're trying to figure out your way in these issues, here's 11 sort of partners to walk this journey with you. If you feel like I don't know where to go to integrate or to think about these ideas, or I feel like I'm just getting started, I would like to know and learn more, take the invitation of this conference, like you do this podcast and live stream, as partners who are willing to walk with you from sort of every level, faith leaders from different traditions, people in Congress, people that are trying to work from outside the system in, people from inside the system out. Like wherever you find yourself, I'm confident that you'd find somebody here in this Truth and Conciliation summit to be somebody who'd partner with you. So just congratulations, Stephany. Congratulations, Dena. It's really, really great. Anybody with a final word that want to give to us here before we bid our farewell and ask people to see us tomorrow and again next Wednesday?
Yeah, I just want to add that if money is, if there's any financial burden, we have scholarships available. So please don't let money be the thing that stops you from having this deep, deep dive of a conversation. I'm so excited and look forward to seeing folks there.
Very good. All right, friends. We will see you then. Happy Faith Wednesday. May you find a little faith, hope, and common good in the world, and continue to be people that want to tell the truth and create a sense of new beginning for all of us. So, Dominique, Stephany, Dr. Dena, Producer Dan in the background, thanks for all the good work today, and all the rest of you. We'll see you tomorrow, again Friday, or if not next Wednesday. Thanks.